thank you to the organizers for inviting me here in this important conference. I just want to say that SNU CTMS has been my home for the last 7 years, so I feel like coming back. Anyway, I want to move on to my talk. It's following Dr. King's wonderful presentation, and I might overlap with some of the things that she says, but it's on the demographic conundrum, but this time focusing on gender. Okay, so just as Dr. King mentioned, there are, in my view, two demographic trends that present real serious challenges in the world today. On one hand, you have young populations, countries with ever-growing young population facing an increasingly young population entering the labor market with the potential to reap what we call the demographic dividend. On the other hand, you have countries like Korea with aging population facing old age dependency ratios and shrinking of the labor force with implications, economic, social, and demographic implications. I'm going to argue that gender equality in both cases is a key stabilizing factor to rebalance the demographic trends. I'm going to focus my talk on the aging population because that's where Korea is part of. I'm going to first present the framework of my talk. I'm going to argue that demographic shifts, gender equality, and care are closely intertwined. In fact, the significant shifts that Korea and other advanced economies are experiencing today have made their close interconnections with gender equality and care, making it a critical, urgent development agenda. You see, as Dr. King mentioned, demographic shifts has immense influence on the size of the care economy, both immediately and in the longer term. How the cost of caring for dependents are distributed, what percentage of care needs are being met by governments, markets, communities, families, especially by women family members, will affect fertility, female labor force participation, economic development, and human well-being. So I'm going to focus my talk on the demographic conundrum in Korea with some comparison to other advanced economies. So let me just summarize what was mentioned earlier. What are the consequences of what we are now experiencing as an increasingly inverted population pyramid, meaning to say the elderly population is growing faster than the lowest age cohort? Well, you have a decline in labor force amidst rising old age dependency ratio. That's an important conundrum. You know now that it will have a slowing down of, it will have an impact on economic growth, both in the short run as well as in the longer run. It will have an impact, or it has already an impact on social expenditures, for example, pensions, and growing strain on public finances. With fertility rates below replacement for many generations, so I'll show you later on the fertility rate for Korea, population growth, excluding migrants, will remain negative, and eventually, well, you already experienced it, I think, at some point, population size shrink. I think in 2022, for the first time, you have more deaths than births, and so you have actually a shrinking of your population. But that will continue. So I'm going to argue, following Dr. King, that decisions regarding fertility and labor force participation, particularly of women, are connected. See, women's time and resource constraints, alongside other factors, there are other factors affecting fertility, but I'm not going to focus on them. I'm going to focus on a particular aspect of the fertility decision, condition their choice regarding the number of children. So think about every single woman in this room. You have a choice to have a child now. You know that it will affect your future allocation of time, including time spent in the labor market. And you know that having more children translates to more unpaid care work for you, not just after birth, for the next 18 months, 18 years, given gender norms, spanning numerous years and less time for paid work. So you know that. So women's fertility choice decision is influenced, among other things, by the anticipated care work burden. For example, if there is an increase in care work contribution by other family members, or there is improved access to affordable quality outside care services, I might change my mind. Okay? So there are things that women will consider when making a decision regarding whether they want to have a child or not. So now I go into where fertility choice or decision is made inside the household. What do we know? So I'm going to look at the literature, mostly in the advanced economies, and share with you some of their findings. Okay? Studies on fertility choice in Sweden, Germany, the UK find that the division of work in couples' household affects childbearing intentions. Some argue further, and these are the work of Meguro, Ehara, and Hitomi Komatsu in the case of Japan, that women's resistance to gender inequality in the home, especially the unequal division of labor, is one of the causes of lower fertility. One way for women to avoid facing additional work burden is by refusing to have more children. So that's on the case of Japan. So Meguro and Ehara and Hitomi Komatsu did that for Japan. I wanted to learn about Korea. Do you have similar findings? Where there's an interesting study by Kim using the Korean longitudinal survey of women and families that demonstrate husband's support in the domestic sphere increased the likelihood of intended births. Formal help also has a positive impact when its costs are not too high. But parental help, meaning grandparents, has no significant impact. Okay? So these studies highlight the role that gender norms play in the husband's contribution to housework and the importance of the husband's support in childcare and housework on women's fertility decisions. So let's look at what's happening in Korea. The wonderful group of Korean scholars and myself and another student in American University did this interesting study on unmet demand for caregiving support in Korea. And the family provision of caring for both elderly and children in Korea still covers a large proportion of total care provision, even though you have a growing formal paid care sector. And there is also evidence on excessive caregiving experienced by primary caregivers, meaning if you ask the primary caregiver, how much time do you spend on unpaid care and domestic work, let's say 7 hours, how much do you want or do you prefer to spend time? It's not that you don't want to spend time taking care of your child, but how much? I want to spend 5 hours, but now I'm spending 8 hours or 7 hours. So that's what I mean by excessive caregiving. And there's also evidence in that study that there's difficulty in obtaining more support for caregiving from family members, particularly the husbands, with respect to childcare. And even though there is a paid care services supported by the government, there's public investment on childcare and long-term care insurance, there's still inadequate paid care services. So that's something to keep in mind as to, the conundrum around care. I'm going to just quickly show this because I think it might show up in the next presentation of Dr. June. The average time spent on paid and unpaid work by women, this is comparing 2014 and 2019 Korean Time Use Survey. Well, the not so good news is that women still spend a lot of time doing unpaid care. That's the yellow bar on top. The good news, however, is that men spend, I would say, 12 minutes more per day on unpaid work on average. Okay, so there is a decline in women's unpaid work, and there's a slight increase by men's paid work, around 12 minutes. But the disparity is going to be even larger for parents of young children, because this is just all men and women in the sample. So then let me look at another factor that play a role in the declining fertility rate, the marriage rate. Okay, so my argument is that there could be some conflicts and tensions regarding fertility decisions in families. Husbands say, I want to have more children. And the woman said, no, I don't want to have some. Or maybe if we have, we'll have only one. Okay? So this power of dynamics can create these tensions, since men and women may have different views. Husband can contest their wife's choice to have less children, so that's the kind of power dynamics. Or women may have, at the end of the day, have her choice. Okay? In that study that I cited earlier, Kim demonstrated in his study that when husbands in Korea do not contribute much to domestic work, gender inequality grew with parity. A similar finding was found by Hitomi Komatsu using longitudinal data for Japan. So to avoid such potential conflict, if I'm a young single woman, I see what's happening out there, including my parents, women may choose not to marry. After all, I can live with my parents, as the dean mentioned. You know, you have 20 over or 25-year-olds still living with their parents. I eat free, I can go out, you know, I don't have to, you know, change diapers or do my laundry or cook my own meals. I will choose not to marry, or if I marry late, okay? Leading to what we now observe in Korea, a decline in marriage rates, which is a key driving force behind low fertility and rapid population aging. Here is data using Statistics Korea data, where you have between 1981 and 2023, and you could see the declines, especially since the 1990s and early 2000s, beginning of the 21st century. And you have a steady decline starting from 2011 to 2023. Now, that said, the government of Korea has done a lot to address this conundrum. It's not that they ignored this problem. They've been on top of it for the last 3 decades or 2 decades. Okay, it has attempted to improve its care, social, and employment policies to promote gender equality, work-family balance, enhance childcare support. And in the last 2-3 years, you have improved parental leave policies to expansion of public daycare centers and workplace childcare facilities. But I would argue more can and needs to be done in order to effectively meet, address the demographic challenge and demographic conundrum, and have a more sustainable, equitable development in Korea. So let's now go to the labor market, okay? Among advanced economies, Korea has the largest gender gap in wages, 31 percentage point difference, and a high gender gap in labor force participation. So this is from OECD data. I got this from an IMF report, especially in Korea. And you could see Korea is the red one where the arrow is pointing, which has not the lowest labor market participation gap. I'm sorry, it has the largest labor market participation gap, over 30%. And you could see that the labor the percentage of labor force is roughly around 20 percentage points in 2021. So what explains these gender gaps in the labor market? I'm going to summarize some of the findings of labor economists on this topic. Given that Korea is an advanced economy, there's a very high education and literacy, human capital for both men and women. In fact, it's a reversal of education gap. Women tend to be more highly educated on average than men. That doesn't play a role in explaining the gender gap. Observable characteristics for men and women explain none of the gender employment gap and little of the wage gap or regular job gap. However, presence of children and or elderly, meaning residing inside the household, is a major factor behind the gender employment gap for prime age women, that's from 25 to 64 years old, but explain little of the gender wage gap or gender gap in the likelihood of having a regular job. In fact, these studies, particularly the more recent one by Stansbury, shows that large gender wage gap and gender gaps in the likelihood of having a regular full-time job persist even for women without care responsibilities. So it's not just care that's keeping the women from having higher wages, or at least in parity with men. Something else is going on. Okay.
Sorry, Soji.
How many minutes? 5 minutes. Okay.
No, not even 5 minutes. You're over.
Oh, okay.
I have coughed twice.
Oh, sorry.
2 minutes ago.
Thank you.
So,
okay, well, I'm just going to skip that one. I'm going to just say that what else can be done. Can I just have 1 minute? Yeah. First of all, care policies and regulations that improve care workers' wages, their labor conditions, and quality of care is very important. The quality of care in particular, and the working conditions and wages of care workers. That determines the quality of care. Gender-aware public policies that systematically encourage and support gender egalitarian social norms. So it's not just providing public investment in care, but also supporting gender egalitarian social norms. Gender-aware assessment of labor and social policies with attention to working conditions and wages, particularly of the female occupations. Labor market reforms to enable flexible work hours without any wage and benefits penalties, because that's where women tend to congregate, and the creation of workplace cultures that support and respect care responsibilities of employees, both men and women. And finally, I'd like to also bring up that it's also important to review fiscal policies such as tax policies and pension policies to ensure that they do not have what we call male breadwinner bias. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Floro. And my apologies to both Dr. King and Professor Floro for cutting you short.